What if there was a source that I could share with you where 100% of the clients actually wanted to sell? That's right, 100%. What source am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about for sale by owners. In this video, I'm going to share with you how some of the most successful realtors will actually approach for sale by owners. So stay tuned. Hi, everyone. Robert Villanueva here over a buyer's consult. And of course, as always, I'll see you at the top. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right in. And what I'm going to talk about is 8 very specific things that I want you to know about for sale by owners. Now, this is vital. This is something that I'm, of course, going to encourage you to pay really close attention to because these are things that a lot of the most successful agents will use in order to capture most for sale by owners. The first thing, now this is going to be somewhat parallel to the expired video that I put out not too long ago. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about point number 1 is identify your top 3 zip codes. Now, why do I want you to identify these top 3 zip codes? Because we're always picking and choosing. We're nitpicking, we're identifying in regards to the for sale by owners that we do want to speak with, the ones that we don't want to speak with. Well, if it falls in your top 3 zip codes, I want you to go after them. I want you to go and approach them as quickly as you possibly can. I'm going to encourage you to even go and knock on their doors. I did say go knock on their doors. Now, why is this important? Is because part of what we do to help for sale by owners, and of course, our clients, our sellers, our buyers, is to get to know all of the inventory, which is not just what's in the MLS, but also with what is the competition within the areas that we service. So that's point number 1. Now, of course, as always, I'm going to encourage you to please subscribe, comment, like, and share as I, of course, want to continue to put out more and more content, which I am extremely grateful for all of you that are, of course, tuning in. All right, let's talk about point number 2. Now, point number 2 is, as I mentioned before, it's going to create a second focal point. And the second focal point is your top 3 cities. Now, why is there a difference? As I mentioned before in a previous video, the reason for that is because the market goes up, the market goes down. And in that, when the market goes up, for sale by owners, for the most part, they fly off the shelf, right? They don't need us. They can pretty much, in a sense, sell the home on their own, at least is with what they think. And when the market is a little bit slower, some of these for sale by owners start to, of course, look in a position where they might, their patience starts to wear a little bit thinner. And it's something that where we can, of course, take advantage of. Now, in that, the reason for the 2 separations is just simply if you are in a market where it's a little bit slower and there's a lot of for sale by owners, well, maybe you can actually, of course, prioritize it simply by the zip codes. But in the second focal point, when the market is a little bit stronger and for sale by owners are not lasting as long, you might need to expand a little bit. The reason I'm giving you these 2 focal points is because you want to be able to have a minimum standard. That minimum standard is if that property falls in any of these categories, ideally you're going to go after them. And of course, you're going to knock and try to get and build that relationship with that for sale by owner. Now, let's move over to point number 3. On point number 3, let's talk about the for sale by owner mindset. Now, this is really important as to for sale by owner mindset because unfortunately, a lot of times realtors don't understand this. And what do I mean by that? Well, a good percentage of the time, agents, what they'll do is they'll call the for sale by owner. They might visit them that one time, and then that's it. And they move on. And then they just basically just move in a direction that is not going to allow them the opportunity to capture that for sale by owner. Now, let's talk about the mindset. This is what I'm trying to get at. In that very first week, it's very common. I'm not saying 100%. I'm speaking from a perspective of the majority of the for sale by owners. That very first week, you kind of have this know-it-all. Okay, and what do I mean by that? You call the for sale by owner and they go, no, I'm good. I don't need you, Robert. If you have a buyer, sure, you're welcome to bring them by. They have this confidence, right? And then that second week, there's kind of almost this annoyance. Robert, like I said, stop bothering me. I have your number. If I need you, I will call you. Then you get to that third week. And that third week, they have this kind of with what I call is the I'm sure I got this, but if I need you, I got your number. Then that fourth week, there's doubt that starts to creep in. And what ends up happening in that fourth week with most for sale by owners, they go in the direction of, I think I got this. I'm not quite sure, but I'm going to continue to just move along, chug along. Then you get to that fifth week. And in that fifth week, they go into the direction, man, I hope I got this. Sixth week, I don't know if I have this. The seventh week, they now go into the direction of, I don't think I have this. I really need to start looking for an agent. The eighth week, they go into the direction of, you know what, I really should be looking at who should I hire. Now, this is no exact science, but the reason I share that with you is because a lot of times what agents will end up doing is they call the for sale by owner the one time. And when they call them on day 3 as they're on the market. And again, what is that version? The majority of the time, it's going to be that version of the know-it-all for sale by owners. Again, I'm not saying every for sale by owner is like this, but it puts them in a position where, hey, look, I don't need you. I'm okay. But what you need to do is you need to be in a position, which is point number 4. And point number 4 is the average for sale by owner is going to take about 6 to 8 weeks. Now, the reason I went over the last point is because in that you have to be able to call them every single week, which we're going to talk about in just a second. And in that week after week after week, you are going to build some version of rapport. So we have to understand that it's going to take some time the majority of the time. So when an agent is calling them that one time on day 3, like I mentioned, it doesn't work too well. And knowing the fact that it's going to take them a little bit extra, a little bit more time because of their thought process, ideally, we're going to be in a position where we're, of course, going to be able to build that relationship. Now, we'll talk about the calling them week after week in just a little bit. Of course, as always, if you like this video, I'm going to encourage you to subscribe, comment, like, and share. Okay, so I'm going to encourage you in regards to that. Now, let's move over to point number 5. Now, here's what I want to do. This is where it's going to start to differentiate you. What I want you to do is I want you to be able to create with what I call as a for sale by owner profile sheet. What's a for sale by owner profile sheet? Well, I hear this all the time as a coach. You know, coach, I'm calling for sale by owners, but there isn't really a lot. And you're probably right. There isn't a lot. And, 1, 2, or 3 that show up for the week. But remember, we're not just calling them for that 1 week. We're going to call them week after week after week after week. I also said it's going to take about 6 to 8 weeks on average. Now, the thing is, some of them are going to take 10, 12, even 15 weeks. So you're going to create with what I call as an accumulation of all of these for sale by owners. So now you're going to have a little bit of a hard time differentiating between the for sale by owner that went on the market last Thursday versus the one that went on the market 3 months ago. And you want to be able to have some version of differentiation between one for sale by owner and another. And in that profile sheet, it's going to give you the opportunity to know where you're at in one for sale by owner versus all of the other for sale by owners. So as you go through and you accumulate, and let's just use an example that there's only 3 for sale by owners that end up showing up a week, but you have about 10 weeks worth, as you can see, that's about 30 plus. And in the 30 plus for sale by owners, ideally, you want to be able to remember some of the things that they gave you. Now, you might remember the one that you called on Monday. You might remember the one that you called last week, but are you going to remember the information and the details about the one that actually spoke with 10, 11, 12 weeks ago? I don't know. I don't think so. At least I'm not that good. And as far as that is concerned, what you'll want to do is you start to create that profile sheet. And in that profile sheet, you'll just keep some basic information, name, phone number, their email, and you're going to want to start to log some of the things that you're doing as far as with what you're sharing with them. Now, you're also, of course, going to identify where they're going, when they're wanting to get there, why they're wanting to get there, the motivation. We know that one. So we want to make sure that we're keeping tabs of all of this because when we go back and call them the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, or 12th time, we want to be able to use it as a reference. Now, Joe, you mentioned to me that your goal was to get over to Florida. Now, I know that you mentioned to me that part of the reason getting out there is because you're anticipating your daughter to go to school out there and you wanted, of course, be nearby. When we say things like that, it gives them, at least the appearance that we care, that we're listening to with what it is that they're trying to accomplish. Now, the other thing on the profile sheet, this is the part that is going to be really important because we're going to talk about in just a second about the weekly calls. And in that, you're going to want to track what are the topics. Each time you call the for sale by owner, Similar to what is our database, we want to be able to create some version of value or doubts. And in that, we don't want to always go from a position of doubts, because if we go from a position of doubts, then it's going to make us look like as if we're just that cheesy slime ball of a salesperson. But if we provide some version of a benefit, which I'll share with you in just a little bit, it makes us stand out. So I want to make sure that we understand the purpose and the benefit of that profile sheet. It's not just to keep a name and a phone number on there. It's to create basically with what they're wanting to accomplish, and we can differentiate from one for sale by owner to another. Okay. Now let's talk about one of the most important points in this. You got to call them weekly. Okay. And everybody has so many different variations as to when you should call them. Some people call them on Friday, some people call them on Monday, some people call them on whatever the day is. But ideally, there's going to be a day that you're going to have with what I call is for sale by owner day. And what is for sale by owner day? Well, remember, you have accumulated. If you do, you should have a system in place. And in that, you'll have 10, 15, 20, 30 of these for sale by owners. And you're going to want to have that weekly conversation. And yeah, you're going to want to have a conversation with every single one of them. Now, what day did I call? Well, I found it to be most effective on Tuesday. Why Tuesday? Again, everybody has a little bit of variation as to why they pick the day that they call for their weekly follow-ups. But I'm going to walk you through a scenario. Okay. We all know that most sellers, including for sale by owners, think something magical is going to happen over the weekend, right? Pretty typical. And what ends up happening is they show the property on Saturday or Sunday for that matter, and the buyer, of course, doing their thing, and they say, wow, you know what, Robert, we really like this house. Let me talk to my lender and let's see if we can actually put a deal together. Well, what ends up happening is that buyer goes and speaks to the lender over on Saturday, Sunday, and maybe even on Monday, and the for sale by owner finds themselves in a position where they're waiting for a response from that buyer. And sometimes that buyer, unfortunately, doesn't qualify. We know that. Been there, done that. And sometimes the buyer does qualify, but they don't like the terms. Or they were just being polite when they were actually just seeing the home of that for sale by owner. We know how this can actually be. But unfortunately, the for sale by owner doesn't know this. And what ends up happening is that a good percentage of the time, if I'm calling a for sale by owner on Friday, what they'll usually say is, you know what, Robert, let me just give me through the weekend, and then we can talk then. So it's really important we understand this, because now we'll find ourselves in a position where the alternative is we call them on Monday. But in this case, if I call them on Monday, what ends up happening is they'll say things along the line of, Robert, well, I had a buyer over the weekend and they're talking to their lender. Well, here's the problem. That buyer may or may not be talking to their lender, but all of a sudden that buyer starts to ghost, starts to disappear from that for sale by owner. But the for sale by owner is under the illusion that that buyer is going to come through. And a percentage of the time, yeah, that buyer does come through. But another percentage of the time, the buyer doesn't. And if I call them on Monday, what ends up happening is they'll give me at best, hey, Robert, I got a buyer over the weekend and they're working with a lender. So I'm hoping that they'll come together. And then I get the brush off again. So instead, I wait until Tuesday. And Tuesday is where I find is actually the most ripest when I catch them on that rebound. Why? Because again, they showed the property Saturday or Sunday, and then they actually, the buyer went to go speak to their lender, and for whatever reason, it didn't come together. The buyer and the for sale by owner are trying to play a little bit of a text tag or voicemail tag on Sunday and Monday. And then the for sale by owner finds out that basically that buyer is not going to come through. Okay. I usually get a little bit of a better response. That's the reason I pick Tuesday. And on Tuesday, that's FSBO day. And what's FSBO day? Well, that's where I'm going to go through and call all of those 30 for sale by owners. Sometimes the call is going to be only about 60 seconds. Sometimes the call is going to be 3 to 5 minutes. But as you can see, if you have 30 of them, it could take you, a certain amount of time, maybe an hour, 2, and sometimes even 3. But at least you have the opportunity to create a day that is going to be focused. Now, let's talk a little bit about with what you talk to them about, which is another key thing. Every single week, I talked about creating some version of doubt, or my personal preference is actually having some version of value. What do I mean by that? So the first thing I'm going to ask of you before I go through a scenario is I want you to create with what I call as a menu of topics. Yeah, it's kind of similar to the database that I've mentioned before. And in that menu of topics is, of course, going to be specific to those for sale by owners. What are some items? I'll give you a couple of them. Well, if you're in a state where there is an escrow, you might want to talk about escrow. How about talking to them about title? How about talking to them about cross qualification? How about talking to them about home warranty? How about talking to them about inspections? How about talking to them about who's going to prepare the disclosures? How about just simply talking to them about, again, the part of the doubt, are you aware of the fact that the, large percentage of for sale by owners get sued for a lack of disclosures, things like that. Let's go to the first example. Now, the first example, like I talked about, creating a menu of topics. I'm going to give that for sale by owner a quick little call. I call him on Tuesday. Joe, hey, this is Robert. I'm with Blank Blank Realty. You and I spoke last Thursday, and I know you mentioned to me that you were going to be doing an open house this weekend. And I just simply wanted to check in to see if you ended up getting any bites, any buyers, any offers. No, Robert, actually, we might have somebody, but it doesn't really look like it's going to come together as of yet. That's okay. No worries. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to get the property sold, Joe. Now, let me ask you. Now, when you get that buyer, Joe, who's going to be doing the cross qualification, as an example? And Joe goes, "What? What do you mean? What is that? What are you talking about?" And some of you are actually even saying that as well. What are you talking about? Well, here's the benefit, Joe, of course, of working with me as a realtor on your side. You see, when a buyer comes in, a good percentage of the time, they'll either have a lender or not have a lender. And in good percentage of the time, you are actually at the mercy of that lender's performance. Well, see, the benefits, Joe, of working with me is not only will, of course, we'll have that lender working on it. Let's say that the buyer continues with that lender, but we're also going to get a second set of eyes. And see, Joe, the benefit is, of course, with my lender, what we'll do is they get to do a second checking of that buyer's qualifications. I'm not saying that the buyer has to use my lender, but Joe, isn't it a good idea to get a second set of eyes should that buyer come through? I'm sure you would appreciate, Joe, if you put yourself in a position where 30 to 45 days you set your home aside for this particular buyer, and unfortunately the lender does not actually perform. Well, we can probably save you that headache. Now, would that be okay with you? And Joe's like, "Well, I've never heard of that, but I appreciate the information." Yeah, not a problem, Joe. As a matter of fact, why don't you call my lender and you can go ahead and feel free to use their services. By the way, I'd love the opportunity to share with you the other 21 benefits of hiring me. And of course, I get the dismissal. "No, it's okay. Don't worry about it. But hey, I appreciate the information." I'll send Joe basically a quick little text. "Hey, Joe, again, truly a pleasure. Here's my lender's contact information. Feel free to reach out to him anytime." What's the purpose of that? What's the benefit? Robert, what are you talking about? Well, here's the thing is ideally you are talking up your lender to talk you up. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's say that Joe does actually get a buyer and the buyer does actually perform and wanting to move forward on the purchasing of that property. Well, Joe goes, "Oh, I remember about that realtor, Robert. He talked about the cross qualification. Let me actually give that lender a call and see if we can do that cross qualification." Well, Joe, doing a good job as a for sale by owner, calls my lender, and my lender says, "Hey, I'm just curious. Why aren't you using Robert, by the way? He's a phenomenal agent. He's actually one of the best agents I've ever worked with." Of course, that's what the lender should be doing. And the for sale by owner goes in the direction in most cases, "Well, I was just really looking at saving some money and, paying a realtor commission is just not with what I wanted to do." I get it, but Robert's a great agent. Anyways, let's say that it doesn't come together, but you do that week after week after week after week with different service providers. Do you see kind of with what I'm getting at? Well, there are going to be some times I've had this happen before where the for sale by owner, and we know with what happens, especially if it's the first time, they go in to escrow or they go through the under contract. I know every state's a little bit different, but they go through the process of selling their home and all of a sudden they get a little bit nervous because the escrow company, the attorney, they're not giving them clear direction as to the preparing of disclosures and all the things that comes with it. You and I know that it requires, of course, a little bit more than putting a sign in the yard, putting a lockbox, and then putting it in the MLS. Well, at least we know that, right? So, in that, there are going to be some times in the middle of the process where the for sale by owner goes, let me give that guy Robert a call. Maybe he can walk me through the finish line. And the for sale by owner gives me a call. Robert, hey, this is Joe. I don't know if you remember me, the for sale by owner over on 123 Banana Street. Well, we found a buyer. We went through the cross qualification, and we're in the process of going through and transfer of ownership. But we're a little bit stuck. The escrow company's asking us for disclosures, and the buyer's asking us about inspections, and we're kind of a little bit lost in the direction that we're needing to go. Is there any chance maybe I can give you a couple of percents, whether it be 1, 2, or whatever that percentage is, and maybe you can help us get to the finish line? Sure, not a problem. Okay, so now you get the opportunity to sometimes backdoor into a deal like that. I've had it happen a couple of times, probably more than a couple of times, but in that situation where they give you a call and now you basically have a deal just fall on your lap just because of what I just described, because you're calling the clients week after week after week after week and you're providing that value. Well, let's go in a different direction. What if all of a sudden, as an example, somebody says, well, Robert, what if I just call them and wait until that sixth, seventh, and eighth week? What if I just wait until then and then I'll talk to them? Because like you said, they're going to be ripe then. Well, the problem is that there's no exact science to what I just said. I'm just speaking in terms of on the average. The other part of it too is the fact that, think about it. You called them once or twice on week number 6 and maybe week number 8, but I've called them 6, 7, 8 weeks. Who do you think is going to have a stronger, deeper relationship with them? Do you think it's going to be you or do you think it's going to be me? Just think about that. Let's move on to the next point. As you can see, as I said, I'm going to go pretty deep on that one point. So let's talk about number 7, the ABCs of sales. What's the ABCs? Well, some of you are answering it. Some of you are like, what are you talking about? ABCs is always be closing. And why am I saying this? The reason I'm saying this is I don't want you to be complacent with simply following up. Our job is to do everything in our power to set an appointment. And we have to understand this because a lot of times what ends up happening is the week agent, okay, Robert, you said to call them every single week on Tuesday for 6 to 8 weeks, right? And then you call them, Joe, hey, it's Robert, the realtor, just checking in. Any chance we can get together? No? Okay, thanks. Talk to you next Tuesday, next week. Joe, hey, it's Robert, just checking in. That's not going to work. You have to do everything in your power to be closing for the appointment. It's really important that we understand that. Now, in that, of course, you're going to continue to move forward doing the follow-up, but every time you follow up, you want to be able to give them that value. And of course, that's not the only benefit, Mr. and Mrs. For Sale by Owner. I want to share with you the other benefits. I'd love the opportunity to stop on by. I really honestly don't mind. I can stop by today, or is it better for me to stop by tomorrow? We always have to be closing. Let's talk about the last point. And in the last point is with what is called a preview. Okay, and in a preview, most of you know with what I'm talking about. Some of you may not. What's a preview? Well, it's not an appointment. That's the first thing I want to make sure that we understand. Because some of you do the cheesy version, and the cheesy version is, why don't I come take a look at the home and then we could talk? Well, you go to the home and then you say, let's sit down, Mr. and Mrs. For Sale by Owner. And they're like, no, that's not what we invited you over for. You said you may have a potential buyer and you were going to come take a look at it, for any of your buyer inventory. So no, we don't want to talk about this. That's one of the quickest ways you can actually ruin a relationship, by the way, with a For Sale by Owner. The other thing is, don't be the agent that goes and just simply delivers these packets. What am I talking about? You know what I'm talking about. Don't go and prepare these CMAs, these elaborate listing presentations, putting a net sheet, because if you want the quickest way to not do a deal with a for sale by owner, that's how you do it. Just FYI. Okay. Now, why am I saying that? The reason I'm saying that is because you drop off this information, they take a look at the information, and they go, Robert wants to sell it for this price, charge me this much commission? No way. And that's what happens. So never put yourself in a position where that's happening. Now let's get back to the topic of preview. Now, the reason I went on a tangent is because some of you think that that's a preview. That's not a preview. You go through, you're calling, you're talking to these people, you're building rapport, and then all of a sudden Joe goes, well, do you even have a buyer for my home? Joe, I'm not really sure if I have a buyer for your home. I have an inventory of buyers. What I want to do is come take a look at your home to see if it's a fit for my buyers. Should I stop by today or should I stop by tomorrow? Now, again, going back to the very first 2 points, this is something I want to do with every single listing that is in the top 3 zip codes and every single listing that are in the top 3 cities. Sorry. Again, because that's what we want to do. We want to get to know the inventory. And what do we do at the preview? There's 2 primary sheets. Sheet number 1 is with what is called a pre-qualification. And in that pre-qualification is, of course, to go through a series of questions in preparation of your listing appointment. Number 2 is that of the for sale by owner script. I want you to think of it as a fill in the blank. Now, what do I mean by this? Is you're going to take your clipboard, you're going to take a pen, you're going to take these 2 sheets, but you're going to use the questions for the purpose of conversation. Now, in that, you're going to go through. So, Mr. and Mrs. For Sale by Owner, show me around. They show you around. Well, you mentioned to me, Robert, that your goal was to go over to San Diego. Okay. How soon are you wanting to be there? I know that the price that you're asking right now for your home is $750,000. I'm curious to know, is there a price you wouldn't want to go below? Do you see how we use these questions for the purpose of, having conversation? Okay. Now, there's 2 questions on the pre-qualification that we for sure don't want to ask right out the gates. Number one, which is if what I say makes sense and you feel comfortable and confident, we don't want to ask that question on the for sale by owner preview because they're going to absolutely say no 99% of the time. Second question is, have you ever thought about selling it yourself? Now, at that point in time, they're going to say, duh. So we don't want to do that. Okay. But everything else you're going to use as a fill in the blank. That's what you're going to use for the purpose of conversation. Now, in this, at the very end, what I want you to do is, yes, I want you to take a pre-listing packet. Yes, I want you to be prepared, but you're going to leave that in the car. Before you leave, you sit there and say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I know I can be of some help to you. And I get it. And I truly understand with where you're coming from, you're wanting to sell it on your own. What I want to do is I want to share with you all of the different techniques that I use to sell homes. By the way, are you familiar with the techniques that I use? Why don't we do this? I promise you I was not going to turn this into a cheesy listing presentation, but I also wouldn't do my job if I didn't come prepared. I have an entire packet of information I'd love the opportunity to share with you if you would allow me the opportunity. Would it be better for us to do this now, or should I come back later today at 5 o'clock? As an example. So in that's the purpose of the preview. So I do want you to be prepared in regards to that. Now, hopefully these 8 items that I gave you, these 8 tips, hopefully it helps you capture more for sale by owners. This is something that has always helped me. This is something that always helps the coaching clients that I'm working with. As always, your favorite coach here, I'm going to encourage you, as always, please subscribe, please comment, please like, and of course, please share. Now, don't forget to visit my other platforms. You'll notice that I have this QR code that's actually right by my head. Well, you're welcome to scan that. That's option number 1. It takes you to my other platforms. Or option number 2 is you can just simply look me up with all of the information that is, of course, in the notes down below. But the handles are very simple. It's at the Robert Villanueva. Again, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok. And one thing I'm going to encourage you, I have a group on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 7:30 a.m. Pacific Standard, which is our Facebook Top Realtor training page. We go over a lot of these things as well as scripts. So hopefully that was a helpful tip. As always, your favorite coach here. I'll see you at the top.
Hi, everyone. Robert Villanueva here.